So briefly, what I'm going to try to convince you all and rouse you to think about how to do is to see all of our care systems as part not only of standing up and facing up to the consequences of the climate crisis, by how it's going to make everything worse for what we're doing, who we're doing it for, the forces that are sending people to us for care. But it also, on top of that, is summoning us to reckon with the degree that our care systems have been too distant from caring for the social fabric of societies. We know a lot about how to do that, but partly we've been relegated to micro do it and not macro do it. And the time has come, and the climate crisis demands it of us, that we fight for, learn, and scale the ways that we take what we know to reach further in society so that we create caring societies. Because we know that we cannot nurture the planet if we do not nurture each other. And our community has something to do to make that not just an aspiration or rhetoric, but operationally real and politically resonant. And that's our task that's demanded of us from the social crisis and the climate crisis. So what do I mean by that? So I don't assume that anybody has the same climate, meteorology, geology, literacy. So I'm going to do a very quick Climate 101. So this chart, which I can't point to you. Can I point to you? I can point to you. Are different curves of reduction, the pace of reduction in gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, the burning of fossil fuels, gasoline, oil. The pace at which we need to reduce that over time, the years on the bottom, in order to stay within keeping the Earth's mean average temperature at a certain level of increase from about 200 years ago. All right? So the blue at the bottom, the steepest curve, is the rate at which we have to reduce gas emissions in order to keep the mean average temperature of the Earth rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. You may have heard that target thrown around a lot. The two higher curves are to keep it at 2 degrees Celsius. The highest curve is more than 3 to 4 degrees Celsius range. What curve do you think we're on now? The top. So, and I don't know if folks have been, the New York Times reported today on a UN report that said that the pledges to get onto these curves are not being met by countries in terms of emission pledges. The key thing to see here is the steepness of the curve as each year goes by, right? Because the idea is to get to 50% reduction to the 2050 timeline by 2030. It is 2023 almost. The steepness of the curve, this inflection point going downwards to stay at 1.5 degrees was at 2020. We're already almost 3 years behind. Every year out, that steepness drops, and the physical impossibility of sticking to 1.5 degrees looms larger over the next couple of years. So that's why you often hear about the urgency, 1.5 degrees, and so forth. But I want us to look at these curves as something else that's meaningful to what we do. And part of what we all should do, and I'll say it out loud, is to not vote for anyone who doesn't take that blue goal seriously. But beyond doing that, which we join with other people, this gives us a particular task. Because these curves I would call not just Earth climate crisis curves, they're social climate crisis curves. Whether it's the blue curve, the massive adaptation of changing how people eat, where they live, how they work, how they get energy, how the economy works. I mean, just think what COVID did to our heads. What that transition is going to be like social psychologically, social cohesively. Let alone what's in store for us if we stay where we are in terms of the damage and trauma from what's happening to the Earth unraveling that will have similar but different effects. I'm not going to go into just how bad it looks if we stay on that curve. It looks very bad, and there is not a single elected official, blue, red, Democrat, Republican, who is truth-telling on that. But I'll just say 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees doesn't sound like much. But if you just see these color bars in terms of the degree of damage by these measures, which you can't read, but there are all sorts of things, like the desertification of southern Europe, probably of large swaths of the west and southwest of the United States. These are in decades, not in the end of the century. This is in front of us. South Asia, West Asia are now going to peak this decade in their availability of water from ice melt, which is most of their availability of water. It's all downhill after the next couple of years for a part of the world where 350 million people live, right? So these increments matter. But it's the social climate part of it that I want to talk about. One is what it's going to do to people to live through either one of those curves, as I mentioned. Because we know weather events, drought, disruption, displacement, they all markedly elevate all sorts of issues that bring people to us, right? And I will confess at the outset, I come from a mental health background. I know that line of work better. So some of my examples and references may be more in that track. But it's really all care systems here. We are dealing with vulnerable people who are going to become more so. I understand you all are going to be getting this PowerPoint in the app or something. Already in the app. So you'll see these references, so I don't have to go through them. But there's tons of evidence about those direct impacts, and I'll call them typical impacts. The mental illness diagnoses we're used to treating and people coming us for, all escalated. But what I think we must do as a care community is to go beyond that illness burden, which will grow, and finally reckoning with our role in the social damage burden that illness burden both causes and aggravates and reflects. And that is getting much more attention now as people start thinking about, quote, the connections between mental health and climate change. A couple of years ago, if you read most literature on that, it was mostly about the more depression, more trauma, et cetera. Huge problems that our current system as organized cannot handle. Cannot handle. So we have to re-engineer what we do anyway. But what's really interesting is not only within the mental health profession and more activists around climate, but whole other areas, institutions, disciplines, are waking up to the fact that that is a massive social burden coming down on us. And I personally feel COVID had a lot to do with that realization. So if people follow this kind of thing, the United Nations Development Program, they do a semi-annual series of reports on human development in the world. They report on it. For the longest time, a lot of those metrics were about GDP, economic growth, education, completion, the usual sort of signals of development. Their issue, just recently out, was completely about mental distress. They define mental distress as one of the leading obstacles to humanity navigating the future. This is extraordinary. This is a summary diagram, which you can't see the details of, but just sees a lot of stuff. Toxic stress, environments, pro-attachment behaviors, just everything. How all those things are aggravated by changes in the environment, changes in our political environments, changes in our disinvestment in both democracy and participation in public goods across the globe. How all that fuels into these red things, more mental distress. But importantly, how more mental distress fuels back to aggravate all those other things. And I think that's the part of things that we as a care community really have to pay more attention to, is not just the way the world beats people up to come to us, but how much what we do helps shift the culture, the impacts, the realities of societies that beat up people. We can change that balance. We can create caring cultures. And that's in fact what the Human Development Report calls for. We have an economic system, we have a social system, we have political systems that commodify people and Earth together in synergistic reinforcing ways. And that cycle of destruction has to end. And the human element part of it is partly our job. Macro policies, income stabilization, equity, there are all sorts of macro policies, but there's also ground games that have to contribute to reversing these cycles. And there's some real good scholarship on this point, again, from other disciplines. Economist Carol Graham, among others, if you read one book, read that one, in terms of this body of research from economists showing that a lot of what we debate publicly about, that we call as economic policy problems, like intergenerational poverty, is intergenerational trauma. It's intergenerational despair. It's intergenerational hopelessness. And we have a lot to do to mend that and to interfere with that and to voice an end to those destructive cycles. This is a great summary of itemizing evidence out there on the mental health impacts of neoliberal policies, the degree that we've disinvested in public goods, that we have both our political culture and our economic culture magnify each other as being very much about everyone is their own bottom, zero-sum sort of, you have to do everything yourself kind of culture. Eroding community, eroding the real well springs of human development and well-being. And so we have to stop talking about those policies as economic policies, but as harmful public health threats. All these threads come together in a great book. Sally Weintraub, a psychoanalyst who has written the book Psychological Roots of the Climate Crisis, where she pulls all these things together, including the way she uses this notion of care. That it's not just a kind of empathy between people, but it's work in creating the cultural conditions where that becomes the norm of group practice. And that is how it is reflected in our politics and in our economics. And we can fight back from the bottom up to build those cultures of care. So for us, as care providers, as on the ground, as in our neighborhoods, as the handholders of people facing these dizzying, conflating crises, is part of our job, and particularly coming from a mental health perspective, is we got to get into not treating people who come to us in this bottom left of the curve. In this case, a profile of the spectrum of mental health, from folks with mental disorder to people who are flourishing. Our job is not just to sit here in the corner waiting for people to come to us after waiting for 3 or 4 months, but to push the curve over to the right. And that means a lot of things. That means re-engineering our work, where we do our work, whose hands we touch, what allies we have to extend the reach of what we know and what we do further to the right. But it's necessary social fabric building that we have to be part of, not just because there's a climate crisis coming and we're all going to fall apart, not just that, but even without that, you can't make a dent in the population prevalence of depression or anxiety or substance use without doing that. This waiting in the corner business never worked. And so we should have always gotten into the psychological resource building business. But now we really need to. So the good news is that there are actually a lot of good real-world examples of efforts to do just that, to re-engineer the work so that it reaches further, it reaches people earlier, but it also invites, and I love the conversation this morning when Arthur was talking, and you had shown a quote up, which I'm not going to get right, but that every neighborhood knows their own solution, right? And a lot of the comments when we were in the room were about nothing about us without us, co-creative work, a horizontal way of figuring out what to do. So there are really great examples of that, which reposition formal systems of care instead of the receiving end as a special kind of partner to their community. So I'll be concrete. So I was, when Arthur was the commissioner in Philadelphia, I was in New York City, developed something called Thrive NYC, where the idea was that most of the work, or more of the work, has to be outside of mental health clinics. This was a mental health focused program. And I learned that by working in the global south, working in sub-Saharan Africa, working in the Caribbean and Haiti after the earthquake, where there was this growing field of global mental health that realized, most of the tasks, the evidence-based tasks of prevention, of care, of promotion of mental health, of resilience building, the whole spectrum, most of the skills can be done by non-clinicians. Often better because they're closer and more credible to people who need them, and the value of the professions is to be a coach and partner and backup to those other members. So each one of these dots in this map of New York City is actually a geocoded spot. This isn't just visualization as a graphic, where we had a specific program where we were reaching people through other places. So none of those dots are mental health clinics. They're elementary school rooms, they're job training programs, they're daycare centers, they're homeless shelters, they're police precincts, they're primary care practices. They're all over the place where we were skilling up those people, but partnering them with someone to help them out. The 100 Million Healthier Lives effort, if people don't know it, look it up. This was an effort to build community coalitions, again, with clinical systems as partners, where they frame the strategy, set the aims about how they improve well-being in their community, which by itself was an engine of care, an explosive, credible, quite inclusive engine of bringing people together to problem solve in ways that our politics is completely driving people away from each other. That led to a Wellbeing in the Nation network. They have metrics. They have hyper-local work that is doing their own sidewalk kind of efforts, measuring well-being in their communities, measuring depression in their communities, measuring trauma in their communities, and then targeting approaches and ideas to reduce it. So there's this thing called the Race to Resilience, just getting back to climate, which is sponsored by the United Nations, that is trying to mobilize civil society to do climate adaptation work. So to really bring community level, grassroots level, as well as local governance and lots of other partners to do adaptation work around climate change. What that means is solidifying physical infrastructure, sea level banks and preserving electrical systems and transportation systems, kind of the hardware stuff. So I went to them with an organization I formed called COP Squared and said, which is now a 250 organization network, global north and south, across the global. It's a global organization that's working on this interface of mental health and climate in this very community resilience building way. And we said, you can't have resilient places without resilient people. And so you need a mental health lane. You need a people's resilience lane. And they agreed. So I got to schlep to Egypt in 2 weeks for the next COP and announce with Race to Resilience that they're going to have a people's resilience lane. COP Squared is working over the next year to write a roadmap of how they do it. And how they do it has to be in this very participatory, on the ground, multiple dots of work kind of way. We know enough to put in those dots. There is tons of evidence, which I won't go through here. You can look at these references, but we know what to put in the hands of those people in those dots that helps them take care of their neighbors with depression, with trauma, with anxiety disorder, to reduce the prevalence of those things in their populations, which I have not seen done in any other way than in this way. That bring in this great book, The Nurture Effect. All sorts of ways that schools and workplaces and community centers and YMCAs can do things that promote resilience, that promote attachment, that promote mental health. And the way they do them is inherently inclusive and social bonding and collective efficacy power building. And I'll just end with that I think at the end of the day, we can't be timid that we're onto something. We are onto a secret sauce about actually how democracy should work. I've gotten really interested not just in the idea of participatory democracy or deliberative democracy. You may have heard of things like citizens' assemblies or citizens' juries, where questions are put to random samples of people from an area to deliberate on. They're given objective information, which is the key thing. And the research shows that they actually come, and people who came in the room with very divergent views can come to consensus and often to progressive and actionable conclusions. There's never a science to that. But they're also, when you read about it, when you read what they expect people to be able to bring in that room to do, it's to be able to be perspective-taking, to be able to express themselves, but in a way that's safe and respectful, in a way of asserting what they need, but appreciating limits and the value of mutuality. They basically list things that you will see in the Nurture Effect book, that you will see in any developmental psychology book, that you see in when I learned, one of the greatest initiatives that we did that I learned got real traction was under Thrive and OIC, is we brought early childhood psychologists into early pre-K daycare and child care centers in New York City, which had high adversity facing families there. And the kind of skills we were trying to help them bring into their homes and into their environments were the same sorts of things that Carol Graham talks about as making the difference between the despairing and hopeless and those who move out of poverty. There is a convergence that is psychological, that is about the components of caring, that is not just individual, but really has to become cultural and political. And we can re-engineer how we do our work to make that the new normal. So I have two questions for you. And I'm going to do a little different than Arthur is going to do. I'm going to make you work at a little more pace because the pace of climate change is just forcing this. All right? So one, and we'll have about 10 minutes, is for you to just share reflections about this broader kind of challenge to our systems to re-engineer its work into dots, other ways that we are closer to the ground and we are capacity building of social fabric. What does that sound to you? Does that sound weird? Does that sound possible? Does that sound great, but how do we do that? Does that sound, oh, I heard about that, or whatever that sounds like, to hear what that sounds like? How would it affect how you might lead your organizations to aspire to that kind of role? And then we'll hear a bit, and then I'm going to go back to you and ask you a very pragmatic question. This roadmap for the race to resilience that we have to write, we intend to build a very widely consultative process. And we really need in the geographies that this is going to work. And by the way, the aim is to reach 4 billion people by 2030. This is a really ambitious effort and opportunity to spread what we know to get into dots like that on the ground globally. But we need to energize provider systems of all shapes in all these places to be partners to this kind of work. How can IIMHL, IIDL be a network that helps propagate and energize and elevate providers around the world to step up to that challenge? So first we'll start with question one, your reflections on this, and second, what can our organizations do? And do I say let go? Start with the first question. How much time will we have for that? 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes, and then we'll do a quick canvassing, and then we'll get to the second question. Thank you.